The morning sun filtered softly through the aged curtains of my study, dust motes dancing in the pale light like tiny memories suspended in time. The house, my home, and the fortress of our family's legacy stood silent around me, its walls heavy with decades of whispered secrets and quiet struggles. A faint scent of polished wood and old paper lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a familiar shawl. I sat quietly by my desk, my hands resting lightly on the worn leather of my grandmother's journal. The silence was profound, yet it was the kind of silence that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words and untold stories. This house had been my refuge after my husband passed. It held the imprint of his laughter, the subtle fragrance of his aftershave lingering in corners, the warmth of dinners and celebrations long past. And now, in the absence left behind, it had become my emblem, the enduring testament of a life built with unwavering resolve. Loneliness was a steady companion, but it never overwhelmed me. Rather, it reminded me of the battles I had fought and the reason I had to keep moving forward. My morning ritual was the thread weaving together fragments of peace among the chaos that life inevitably brings. A slow sip of black coffee, the softness of worn velvet on the armchair, the weight of family photographs staring back at me from the mantelpiece. Faces frozen in time, smiles that masked sorrows, hands that had held mine in comfort during storms I endured without complaint. My son Todd and his wife, Marissa, appeared in those frames too, their youthful faces bright with promise and blessing. Then the phone rang. The piercing tone shattered the quiet like a sudden gust scattering fragile leaves. My heart tightened instinctively before I even answered. Todd's voice, sharp and clipped, came through with an edge that seemed to slice the space between us. "I'm suing you, Mother," he said. No softness, no hesitation. "You're unfit to manage the estate, the business, the family affairs. It's time someone else took control." For a moment, my mouth went dry, as if the gentle rhythm of my day had been violently interrupted by a cold hand pressing against my throat. The words echoed, distant and yet brutally clear: unfit, incompetent, incapable. Years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, silent tears, and quiet negotiations, all dismissed with a callous declaration. I sat frozen, the phone trembling slightly in my grasp. A slow burn of disbelief began to coil in my chest, but I did not speak. I could feel his bitterness, his sense of entitlement masquerading as duty, as if the years I had dedicated to building this family, to protecting its fragile threads, were meaningless. The house suddenly felt colder, as if the walls themselves had recoiled from the betrayal. I looked around. The polished surfaces, the fading portraits, the carefully curated memories, all now shadowed by the weight of his accusation. The courtroom came into focus in my mind's eye. The sterile brightness of the lights, the murmuring crowd, the cold bench where the judge would preside. I saw Todd standing there, eyes blazing with a self-righteous fire, his wife Marissa by his side, ever the whisperer of doubts, feeding the seeds of discord that had taken root in the family's heart. When the judge summoned me, my voice faltered only once, a crack in the calm I usually wore like armor. The truth was harsh and unforgiving. My own son, the boy I had nurtured and raised, was the author of my deepest wound. This was no ordinary legal battle. It was a rupture in the bloodline, a betrayal carved with the sharpest of knives. The accusation felt like thunder in a once peaceful sky, a fracturing of trust more profound than any I had endured before. Yet beneath the shock, beneath the sting, and the tears I swallowed quietly, a single truth crystallized within me. This was not an end, but a beginning, the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. I had lived my life as a quiet guardian of this family's legacy, a sentinel who preferred silence to conflict. But now, silence was all I had left, my only weapon against a storm that threatened to dismantle everything. And in that moment, I understood that the path ahead would demand more than endurance. It would require a mind sharpened by patience, a heart fortified by resolve, and the cold clarity of a woman who, despite betrayal, would not be broken. The house, with all its memories and promises, was still mine. It must be. I closed the journal gently, folded my hands in my lap, and allowed the weight of the accusation to settle. But inside, beneath the quiet surface, something fierce and unyielding was awakening. The fight for my empire, for my home, my dignity, and my peace was only just beginning. The courtroom's cold glare slowly faded from my thoughts as I walked back into the quiet sanctuary of my study. The walls of this old house, lined with memories like silent sentinels, now felt heavier, as if the weight of Todd's accusation hung in the very air, thick and suffocating. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting slanted shadows across the furniture. The years of accumulated dust, a quiet reminder of time passing, of battles waged and won, and the solitude I had settled into after my husband's passing. Outside, the garden bloomed indifferent to the storms within these walls. The roses swayed gently in the breeze. They were serene in their simplicity, rooted and unshakable despite the shifting winds. I envied that quiet strength, and I knew it was the strength I needed to call upon now. I sank into the leather armchair, worn with use and comfort, clutching the edges as memories rose unbidden. For decades, I had been the invisible thread weaving this family together. The countless sleepless nights spent stitching together fraying partnerships, the whispered phone calls that no one knew about, the tears shed in the silence of my bedroom long after the house had gone to sleep, all had been hidden behind a facade of calm and order. Looking back now, I understood why the world saw me as composed, never bowed beneath pressure. It was because beneath every outward silence existed a fierce determination, a power that did not need to roar. My mother had taught me that long ago. She always said that true strength showed in patience and quiet endurance, not rash defiance. Silence can be the sharpest weapon, she had said once, her voice steady and soft in the dim light of a kitchen late at night. Todd had clearly mistaken my quiet for weakness. He saw only a frail woman whose days were numbered, a matriarch too old to wield influence. How wrong he was. The venom in his accusations was not fueled by care or concern, but by a deep, entitled hunger that blinded him to the sacrifices I had made, sacrifices he took for granted. Marissa, his wife, played her role flawlessly, weaving doubt and dissent with careful words and glances. Together they had formed a united front, confident in their conquest. But beneath this bitter awakening, something deeper stirred within me. I recalled a promise, whispered on a night long ago beneath the stars, between my late husband and myself. We had spoken of legacy and love, of storms that would someday come. His voice, though faint now in my memory, was resolute and full of faith in me. "Promise me, Evelyn," he had said, "no matter what happens, hold tight to your strength and your silence. Sometimes silence, when wielded wisely, is stronger than any shout." Those words were no longer simply a memory, but a lifeline. I would not meet Todd's fury with anger or despair. Instead, I would respond with stillness and steadfast resolve. To do otherwise would be to play into their hands. They craved drama, confrontation, noise. They believed the old matriarch was a fading star, ready to extinguish. But I was no flame to burn out easily. The empire I had nurtured was vast and multifaceted, built on trust, wisdom, and quiet dedication. Yes, cracks had appeared, but those cracks were not to weaken. It was time to repair and fortify. The power lay not in loud assertions, but in careful control of the foundations, financial ledgers, legal contracts, and loyal confidants who shared my vision. I allowed myself to remember the countless nights when I alone wrestled with the numbers, tracing irregularities beneath layers of accounts, noting inconsistencies too subtle for casual notice. I had seen shadows where others didn't. Todd's reckless ambition left footprints, and I knew where to find them. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but the fire it ignited was fiercer. Motherhood, with all its hopes and heavy burdens, had transformed me. It had been a journey of sacrifice and patience, but now it gave me a different kind of power, the power to wait, plan, and gather strength. I considered the family's future, my grandchildren who deserved a legacy not marred by greed and fractured trust, but by quiet victory and integrity. What story would I leave to them? One of defeat and surrender, or one of perseverance and wisdom? The answer came as a steady flame. It would be the latter. I rose slowly, the fading afternoon light casting long shadows across the room, and made my way to the cabinet beneath the window. Behind its wooden door lay the family's secrets, the contracts marked by countless signatures, the financial statements plotted with precision and care. Hidden among these documents were the truths Todd sought to bury beneath falsehoods. With steady hands, I pulled out a worn, leather-bound folder, the physical weight of it somehow reassuring. I traced the edges, feeling the embossed initials and faded ink. Within those pages lay the map to the family's true fortune, the ledger of loyalty and betrayal. Tomorrow, these truths would become my allies. I would gather my trusted friends, my legal confidants, those who had watched silently and supported me through the years. It was time to translate patience into action. But not yet. Tonight, I allowed myself rest in the strength that silence gave me. The quiet was no longer a void, but a shield, a weapon, the steady heartbeat beneath the storm. And so I sat by the window, watching the garden settle in twilight, gathering every ounce of calm I could summon. Todd and Marissa believed they had weakened me, but they had only awakened a force they had grossly underestimated. This was my empire, hard-won through decades of care, wisdom, and sacrifice, and I would not lose it to arrogance or deceit. Silence was my weapon, patience my sword. In this quiet, I had already begun to reclaim what was mine. In the tense weeks that followed, I undertook the immense task of rebuilding trust, reclaiming control, and unmasking deception, all with the quiet precision of a seasoned strategist. My daily life became a delicate dance of patience and meticulous calculation, where every move mattered and no detail was insignificant. While Todd paraded in the open, armed with arrogance and a loud belief in his assumed victory, I operated in the shadows where few could discern my true intent. The war was not in the shouting, but in the silent, deliberate acts of reclaiming what rightfully belonged to me. The first person I sought was Marian, a woman as resolute and discerning as I was. More than 40 years of friendship and alliance made her my strongest ally, a legal eagle whose sharp intellect and unwavering loyalty had been tested through far tougher battles. Marian's office was a sanctuary of knowledge. Heavy volumes lined the walls, and the faint scent of polished leather and old books filled the air like a balm to my weary spirit. I remember sliding that very worn leather binder across her desk, thick with contracts, bank statements, letters, and notes that had been silently accumulating over years. Marian's eyes locked onto the first page, her gaze growing sharper as she scanned through the entries. As I watched, I saw her mind unravel a story I already knew but needed her to confirm, a story of betrayal so intricate it had taken years to fully understand. Todd's financial management of the family estate was reckless at best and at worst criminal. He had siphoned funds, signed illegal contracts, and created phantom accounts to hide his misappropriations. None of this was obvious to the casual observer, but in the careful eyes of a woman who had spent her life navigating corporate and legal labyrinths, it was blatant. Each transaction was a thread waiting to be pulled, and Marian's practiced hands slowly unwound the fabric of lies Todd had so carefully woven. We discovered layers of deceit, transfers to offshore accounts with obscure beneficiaries, unauthorized loans taken out in the family's name, and legal documents unsigned or manipulated. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Todd had not just acted out of greed, but had orchestrated a campaign to wrest control completely from me, relying on falsehoods and manipulation to legitimize his claim. But the truth was more bitter still. Marissa, ever the master manipulator behind the scenes, had played her part with cold calculation. Emails revealed her influence in quietly spreading unrest during family meetings and quietly steering certain board members against my stewardship. She was not content to stand in Todd's shadow. She was an active architect of the division, sowing seeds of doubt and eroding alliances that had once stood firm. Together, their plot had nearly toppled decades of loyalty and sacrifice. But my resolve hardened the moment I saw the full scope. This was no longer a feud between mother and son. This was an orchestrated coup rooted in self-interest and betrayal. Night turned to dawn in Marion's office. Papers were scattered across the desk, stacks of evidence growing ever taller, and our plans grew sharper. Every misdeed became a hammer, every forged signature a nail, as we prepared to construct a legal bulwark strong enough to crush Todd's unfounded claims. Marion's pen danced across pages, drafting lawsuits, motions, and defensive arguments that were cold, methodical, and unassailable. Parallel to this, I quietly rallied trusted allies, family friends who understood not just the business, but the heart that had built it. Their loyalty was a steady undercurrent beneath the noisy unrest Todd and Marissa stirred. These were the people who had watched our family grow and respected the sacrifices I had made. They stood ready to bear witness when the time came. Within the walls of this house, the command center of my efforts, the atmosphere thickened with quiet determination. Each room held a story, each corner a witness to years of struggle and triumph. The photographs of children long grown, the old hand-carved furniture scarred by time, the faint scent of aged paper and polished wood, all became symbols of legacy I was duty-bound to protect. Legal control over critical assets was quietly restored to me. Without fanfare or declaration, key bank accounts were secured, signatures were retracted, and access locked out from Todd's reach. These moves, though invisible to the outside, began to choke the breath from his campaign. Todd's unshattered confidence dulled slowly under the sheer weight of an unseen siege. I noticed the change in his demeanor. What had once been easy arrogance now flickered with uncertainty. His confident steps faltered. His bold claims were met increasingly with silence and doubt from allies who once stood firmly by his side. The tide was turning not by force, but by the quiet, relentless work of truth and law. The night before a particularly crucial hearing, I sat alone in the study, my legal documents spread across the oak desk illuminated by a single lamp's soft glow. Outside, the garden lay under the watch of the moon, peaceful in contrast with the turmoil inside me. I allowed myself a long breath, recalling the years of hidden tears and countless sacrifices that no one outside had known. In those quiet moments, strength swelled within me, strength born of endurance, love, and an unwavering sense of justice. I thought of my grandchildren, innocent witnesses to this family's trials, looking toward a future I hoped to secure for them. The legacy they would inherit depended on the fight I was now leading. Each careful plan, every meticulous review of financial ledgers, and each silent meeting with Marion and allies was a brick in a fortress I was building around that legacy. A fortress meant not to exclude, but to protect. When Todd and Marissa next faced me in court, they would find a woman transformed. No longer just a mother bruised by betrayal, but a general armed with evidence, patience, and an unbreakable will. The storm was near, but I would not be undone by its fury. I would be the calm center, the eye of the hurricane. My silence was not submission, it was a sword sharpened in shadows. This was my empire, forged by sacrifices known only to me, and I had begun the work of reclaiming it with every quiet, deliberate step. The plan I had so carefully cultivated was no longer just a strategy. It had become the silent engine driving every movement I made. I moved cautiously, deliberately. My actions were as measured as the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, steady, unrelenting, incapable of being hurried or broken. The first step was to secure every vital document, every key asset that Todd might attempt to claim or manipulate. I called in favors from longtime allies, trusted lawyers, accountants, and friends who had stood with me through storms hidden from the public eye. They acted quietly, without fanfare, handling transfers and legal formalities that erased Todd's unauthorized control over critical family accounts. The transactions were seamless and, to all but the most vigilant, invisible. Even as Todd continued weaving his narrative of betrayal and incompetence, the foundation beneath him was crumbling. He strode through life with an unshakable confidence, convinced his court case would succeed. But confidence built on lies and arrogance is brittle. It would not survive the pressure I was building, brick by brick. While he believed he held the upper hand, I was steadily collecting evidence, physical proof that would turn the tide in court. I gathered financial records, contracts, and correspondence that illuminated Todd's mismanagement. Each page was a silent testimony whispering the truth. I also took steps to protect the family home itself, the heart of our empire. Every millimeter was guarded with legal paperwork binding ownership clearly and securely. The ensured that no haphazard signatures or hastily drawn documents could jeopardize what was ours. That old house, with its peeling wallpaper and familiar creaks, held more than memories. It was a symbol of tenacity and lineage I swore to defend. Within those walls, I found new strength. Amid the framed photographs of generations past, the worn furniture carved by hands long gone, I felt the weight of responsibility settle, but also a renewed spark. This was my battlefield, my sanctuary, and I would protect it fiercely. Each night I kept late hours, poring over every detail. The steady glow of my desk lamp illuminated folders filled with evidence. I listened to the quiet hum of the house and let my mind weave through scenarios and contingencies. I knew Todd would strike back, that his lawyers would try to discredit and distract, but I was ready. I was not merely defending territory, I was orchestrating a silent yet powerful symphony of justice. The transition of control over assets was delicate yet thorough. Bank accounts were reconciled and fortified against Todd's influence. Legal representatives were appointed and informed to ensure no unexpected moves could bypass my oversight. The family's finances, once vulnerable under Todd's reckless hand, were now structures of steel. During this period, I communicated carefully, sharing little yet gathering much. I knew when to speak and when to silence my voice. There was power in reserve, and there were battles I had learned to win without firing a single shot. At times, I revisited the memories of Todd as a boy, a spirited, headstrong child who looked up to me for guidance, unaware of the quiet foundations I laid for his future. The contrast between who he was and who he had become gnawed at me, but dwelling on it was a luxury I could not afford. I channeled that pain into resolve. Marissa's manipulations became more apparent as the pieces fell into place. I traced her subtle moves, carefully planted doubts, whispered half-truths among family members, and efforts to alienate proponents of my leadership. Her machinations were sophisticated, a poison that spread in silence, but I responded in kind, neutralizing their effects with measured responses and loyal support. Friends who had once been quietly wary began to see the truth of my stewardship. That recognition bolstered me, turning isolated forts into a network of unyielding support. Their quiet encouragement renewed my spirit. Despite the mounting pressure, I remained calm. The house, with its familiar creaks and the soft murmur of history in every corner, was my constant reminder of purpose. Walls that had heard my laughter and my tears bore witness to my fight. Each room held a fragment of strength to fuel the next step. As the day of a major court hearing approached, I felt the weight of months of preparation coalesce into a focused intensity. My hand trembled only slightly as I signed the final documents, reinforcing my hold over the family estate. This was no impulsive act. It was a culmination of strategy, insight, and years of experience. When the court date arrived, I was ready, not only with evidence, but with a spirit steeled against lies and betrayal. Beneath my composed exterior, a quiet fire burned, patient yet powerful. Todd entered the courtroom with his usual bravado, surrounded by supporters he believed would back his cause without question. Marissa was at his side, her expression tight but confident. Yet there was a strange tension in the air, a subtle shift unnoticed by most, but felt keenly by those who had followed this drama. I stood tall, my hands folded calmly before me. The judge's eyes met mine with a knowing glimmer. In that silent exchange, I felt an unspoken understanding, a recognition of endurance and quiet power that could not be disputed. As I began to present the evidence, the courtroom's chatter dulled to a hush. Each document I introduced peeled back layers of Todd's mismanagement. Unauthorized transfers were exposed, false accounts revealed, and legal maneuvers undone one by one. The weight of truth settled heavily in the room. Todd's confident mask cracked. His voice faltered as I detailed the timeline of deceit, evidence that could not be denied. Marissa's whispered schemes were named tactfully but firmly, unraveling their attempts to divide and conquer. There was no dramatic confrontation, no outburst from me or Todd. Silence carried the strength of 1,000 spoken words. The courtroom became a quiet battlefield where truth was the victor. I ended my presentation with a calm, resolute statement. Power belongs to those who earn it, not those who take it. The judge's nod was subtle but decisive. The balance of justice had shifted. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the familiar walls of the old house welcoming me back like a refuge reclaimed. The storm had passed, and with it, the shadows of betrayal had lifted. The empire remained mine, preserved by silence, patience, and the enduring strength that only years of love and sacrifice could forge. Todd and Marissa entered the courtroom with the kind of ease that comes from believing victory is already assured. Todd's gait was steady and confident, eyes of light with an arrogance cultivated over years of entitlement. Marissa, ever composed, stood like a shadow beside him, her expression tight but calculating, the architect of whispered schemes that had rotted the family from within. They carried themselves as if the war had already been won, as if my presence there was little more than a formality before they claimed the empire I had built. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation from observers who had watched the family unravel over months. Yet beneath my calm exterior, a fire burned slow and steady. I was more than readiness. I was resolve tempered by patience and fortified by hard-won experience. Each step I had taken up until this moment was a careful stitch in a tapestry of truth and justice. When the judge's voice called my name, I rose slowly, hands folding gently before me. I met the judge's gaze and received a glimmer of recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unseen burdens carried by those who endure long and quietly. Around me, the murmur of voices dimmed, the heavy silence of a courtroom that had braced for the inevitable storm settling like a shroud. Opening the folder containing years of meticulous documentation, I began to lay out the truth. I spoke not with anger, but with measured clarity, guiding the room through financial ledgers and bank statements that revealed the deep fractures Todd had inflicted. Unauthorized transfers, hidden accounts, and reckless expenditures emerged from the shadows, their weight undeniable. Each document peeled back another layer of deceit, cutting through the facade of innocence Todd had tried so desperately to construct. The courtroom fell into an almost reverent hush as I recounted the timeline of mismanagement. Todd's confident mask, so long worn as armor, began to crack visibly. His voice, once sure and commanding, faltered in the face of incontrovertible evidence. The glow of certainty in Marissa's eyes dimmed. The poised exterior she maintained wavered, revealing the strain behind her composed demeanor. I introduced correspondences, emails and messages that traced Marissa's role as the instigator of doubt and division within the family's advisory boards and estate management councils. Her tactics, subtle as a shadow but corrosive and deliberate, had sown distrust and severed bonds that should have been unbreakable. This wasn't merely a legal battle, it was a war waged through whispered lies and divided loyalties. At no point did I raise my voice or falter in composure. There were no dramatic outbursts, no impassioned pleas. I let the silence between every word underscore the weight of what was spoken and, more importantly, what was undeniable. When I completed my presentation, I settled the room's breathless tension with one last resolute phrase: "Power belongs to those who earn it, not those who take it." Those words rippled through the silent space. The judge's subtle nod was not merely a courteous gesture. It was a powerful acknowledgement of truth and justice. The scales within the courtroom tipped decisively, setting right the imbalance wrought by decades of lies and ambition. Todd sat rigid, the confidence that once buoyed him drained by the weight of unveiled truths. Marissa, too, retreated into silence, her carefully maintained composure broken by the exposure of her conspiracies. Walking away from the courtroom, the pressing tension began to lift, replaced by an almost tangible peace. Returning to the house, the fortress of my family's legacy, I was embraced by walls steeped in history and endurance. Their familiar creaks and whispered memories welcomed me home, offering comfort after the storm. Each room bore witness to the years of perseverance and the sacrifice that had seemed invisible to the world. This house was not merely bricks and mortar, it was a testament to love guarded in silence, battles fought behind closed doors, and promises that had held fast through the darkest nights. I wandered slowly through the halls, touching the frames of faded photographs and tracing the scars in the carved wood that told stories of past laughter and tears. The weight of betrayal had been immense, but it had forged a new strength within me, a quiet power tempered by patience and resilience. Though Todd and Marissa's bitterness might linger like a shadow at the edges, the mantle of leadership had been firmly restored to me. The estate, the memories, and the future remained secure, and that security had been won not through loud confrontation, but through steadfast resolve. The silence that had once felt like loneliness now resonated as a shield. Patience had been my ally and integrity my sword. In this stillness, I found my victory, a triumph built on enduring love and an unshaken spirit. That night, as I closed the door behind me, I felt a profound calm settle over my soul. I was free from the weight of accusation and betrayal, restored in dignity and strength. The empire was mine once again, held not by force or noise, but by the enduring legacy of silence, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. That night, as the heavy wooden door closed softly behind me, a profound stillness settled in the house. The oppressive weight of accusation and betrayal that had hung over me for months finally lifted, leaving a quiet calm that felt almost foreign after so many restless nights. The silence filled every corner, not as a void, but as a deep breath, a sigh of release from the fight that had threatened to unravel everything I had built. I walked slowly through the house, each step reverberating softly against the familiar floors. The air smelled of aged wood and worn books, the scent of a lifetime's memories compressed into these walls. The photographs lining the hallway caught my eye, faded smiles of children growing up, moments of laughter and love frozen forever. They were reminders of days when hope was abundant and the future seemed assured. My fingers brushed the frame of a picture where Todd, younger and full of promise, sat beside his father. That boy had been innocent then, unaware of the fractures that time and greed would inflict. It was that child I mourned for tonight, even as I knew the man he had become could not be reached by simple forgiveness. The pain of that loss settled beside a quieter feeling, the strength reassuring me that all was not lost and that what I fought for could endure beyond wounds. In the spacious living room, the carved furniture bore the subtle marks of steady hands, years of care woven into worn edges and softened corners. This house was more than shelter. It was a testament to endurance, steadfastness, and the slow, patient shaping of an empire built on sacrifice and resilience. I felt the pulse of that history beneath my skin, a lifeline to something far greater than momentary pain. The night deepened, and as I moved through the rooms I had gathered strength from over the years, I understood that this battle had forged me anew. Betrayal had been a brutal teacher, but it had taught me patience sharper than any sword and dignity quieter than any shout. Where once I had felt isolated by silence, I now recognized it as my greatest weapon, a shield that protected and a sword that cut through deceit. Thinking of my grandchildren, their laughter echoing in my mind, I felt a surge of hope. They deserved a legacy unmarred by greed and broken trusts, a legacy rich with lessons of endurance and love. The home that had weathered storms for generations would now shelter their dreams and futures too. Though Todd and Marissa's bitterness might linger in whispers beyond these walls, it had lost its power here. The mantle of leadership, once challenged, had been firmly restored to me. This was my inheritance, not of wealth or titles alone, but of the quiet strength that comes from years of unwavering devotion and restraint. The house was more than a structure. It was a living chronicle of all I had endured and protected. Its silence echoed not loneliness, but a steady heartbeat of justice reclaimed and peace hard-won. I sat by the window looking out onto the garden glowing silver in the moonlight. The roses, hardy and serene, seemed to embody the same resilience I now felt within. The petals might wither and fall in time, but the roots held firm, unseen but unyielding. In that gentle quiet, I found a victory greater than any court judgment, the peace of having reclaimed my dignity and my destiny through silence and strength. I understood that real power did not roar, but endured, steady and unwavering. The journey ahead would surely hold new challenges, but I was no longer the woman who had entered the courtroom with trembling hands and a heavy heart. I had become a sentinel of my family's legacy, fortified by lessons taught in the hardest school of all. With a final glance around the room bathed in moonlight, I allowed a soft, genuine smile to surface. The empire was mine again, not through force or spectacle, but through the enduring legacy of silence, sacrifice, and steadfast determination. And in that serene embrace of home, I found not just freedom, but a new beginning.